Hi, welcome back to Not So Obvious Watches. I'm Pete McConville, and this is my now long-standing traditional Friday afternoon news service. Long-standing because this is now the third one of these I've done, and I'm actually really enjoying it. Doing this on the Friday works really well for me. Lets me sort of build up stories and build up ideas through the week, bring it all together on a Friday, get it up hopefully in time for people around the rest of the world to read on like a Saturday. So that's kind of what I'm aiming for. I'll probably start looking at if I've got a feature or a watch review or something. I'll probably put that up on a Sunday or a Monday, and that gives me the weekend to kind of concentrate more on things that require a bit more editing. So this is my news service. It's not, I don't claim it to be comprehensive. It's really my run over the target of big things I've seen, little things I've seen, not so obvious stuff I've seen, and where I have an opinion, which is on most things because that's why I've got a bloody YouTube channel. I'll bless you with my thoughts on this. I heard a quote during the week which reminded me of, I have heard this before, and it really, it was explained to me as this is like the essence of wisdom, and I kind of like it, which is all opinions should be strong but loosely held. And that's what I try and aim for. I do form opinions about things, I will let you know, but at the same time, all of my opinions are, as you say, loosely held. I'm open to debate, open to being told I'm wrong, open to adding things. If you've got stuff you'd like to say to me, I'm going to listen to you much more if you subscribe. That's not true. But if you comment, I'll engage with you down below. But if you subscribe, it is good for both me and the channel, so please go ahead and do that. So, all the intro stuff done, now let's get stuck into the watch news of this week. Okay, so the first watch I'm going to talk about actually came out about a week or so ago, but I didn't find it that interesting, and I tend not to talk about limited editions, but on mature reflection, and because I saw it come up again on watch review, wrist review, I'm going to talk about it now, but from a slightly different point of view. Anyway, this is the Breitling Premier Chrono Wheels and Waves Special Edition. So this is part of the new Breitling Premier Edition, Premier range. It's a particular version with a very nice color palette, all sorts of subtle greys and subtle browns. It's actually a really, really pretty watch. If you want to read more about it, go over to Wrist Review, which is where I got kind of the inspiration to bother talking about this watch. I don't actually want to talk about the watch itself, as nice as it is. It's if you want to know more about that, as I said, go to Wrist Review. They did the hard work there. What I did want to talk about was this particular watch. I think is interesting because I strongly suspect it's going to be the first of a huge family of lots and lots of limited editions from Breitling. In fact, in some ways, I think the limited edition, the ability to make limited editions of the Premier chronograph is possibly a core part of the business case of that watch. If you look at the traditional Breitling chrono, which would be the Navitimer, it's really big, it's really busy, it's really crowded, it's got a very well-defined format, and yeah, you can make special editions out of it, like Breitling did 3 for their 50th anniversary this year, but to do that requires a huge amount of work and a massive investment because of the crowded and kind of like it's almost preordained what that watch is going to look like. On the other hand, the new Premier, like the Speedmaster, and it got me thinking about this, like the Speedmaster, it's kind of a blank canvas. There's lots of opportunities to mess with this. And if you look at the Breitling range, you'll see that they've already started, even on their core range. There's lots of alternatives and color schemes and mixes and matches on this. So in addition to the normal ones, you've also got the Norton version, which by the way is a stunning watch, the Bentley version, which by the way is a stunning watch, and now the Wheels and Waves version, which is also very pretty. And I can't help but think that the way that the Premier Chrono was designed was so, like the Speedmaster, it can be such a blank palette for such a huge variety of special editions. So you heard it here first. I'm thinking that the new Breitling Premier chronograph is going to be the speedmaster of the next decade. It is just going to be special edition after special edition after special edition of that particular watch. And if you don't like that kind of thing, which I'm not a big fan of, too bad, so sad, they don't care. Okay, now the second watch I'm going to talk about today is a new ALPINA. It's a version of the ALPINA SEASTRONG Heritage, which is a watch I love. I have reviewed it. One of my very, very first ever reviews was a review of that watch. This one very much in the color of today, which is brown. I'm not sure when brown became the color of the day. In his podcast on Scottish Watches, Archie said he never considers himself trendy, that he considers himself the Mission Brown of the colour palette. Well, it appears that Archie, if he is indeed brown, has become is the popular colour at the moment. So in this particular case, we've got the ALPINA SEASTRONG. Nothing else changes about the watch. Some PVD coating and some new dialed colours. It comes with both all brown and a brown and cream, I think, or brown and ivory. I'll have the pictures up beside me. Pretty looking little watch, but you know, nothing else really much to say about that. The reason I say that brown is popular, and we'll touch on this a little bit later, is I notice in Only Watch, JLC have put together an edition for that, which is not a bad looking watch. I don't love it. It's a little bit boring, but that's brown. And the Longines, who have just come out with a ladies version of their Heritage Diver, have also included a brown version in that. So clearly brown, chocolate, chestnut, whatever colour you want to call it, is as I said, the colour du jour. Although, as my daughter says, is brown really a colour or is it just a stain? But okay, we'll move down to the next part, which is really linked to the previous story, talking about the new Longines Legend Diver, in particular the ladies version of this that they've brought out. There's been an undercurrent, since I've sort of been paying attention to the watch media, there's been this kind of undercurrent of we want to get women more involved. Perhaps we do that rather than making the traditional women's watches. Maybe this is about making things that are like a men's watch, perhaps a unisex or a non-gender specific watch. Perhaps, you know, but just a little bit smaller, which does dovetail in nicely with the idea that we will be making watches smaller in general, and with a slightly altered, not blazing pinks, but a slightly altered color palette. And Longines has just nailed that brief. So what we've got now are a couple of new versions of the long-standing, I think it's been around since about 2006, Longines Legend Diver. Originally that came in a steel case with the black and green dial. What we have here is smaller at 36 millimeters, 3 dial options, one the chestnut brown, funnily enough, one a kind of mother of pearl finish, and then the other one looks like it's based on the original black and green text or black and green indices. So nice watches, not a lot of work required from Longines there. Take an existing watch, mess around with some colorways, reduce it to 36 millimeters. Be interesting to see if it works. Should really highlight that this is not a new thing. I believe Omega has been making something similar, a slightly smaller version of their divers, and certainly Breitling has been going hard in this space really for a couple of years. The previous version of Super Ocean dive watch did come in at 36. And certainly this year, the newest Super Ocean that they released at Basel definitely had two smaller options, and I think this year they really did aim at a slightly feminine but broadly unisex color palette. The whites, but especially the blue and white version of the Breitling, is a really good example of, I think, companies trying to make watches which would appeal to females but are not obviously and only feminine. As a guy, it's difficult for me to assess how successful they've been there. Certainly, looking at the Breitling and certainly the brown version of the Longines Diver, those are watches I would buy, I would wear. They're too small for me at 36, but the colorways certainly still fit within something I would wear. In the extraordinarily unlikely chance that a female listens to this, I would love to get your feedback as to whether Longines and Breitling are getting close to a color palette that both genders would comfortably wear and not feel that they were being patronized or pandered to. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the watch industry stuff, and this is actually going to start with something on Massdrop of all places. I'm going to switch from Massdrop to Only Watch. So how's that for a gear shift? But okay, start with Massdrop. Obviously, the new owners of Glycine are trying to do something. I don't know if it's kickstart the brand. I don't know if it's get rid of a lot of old inventory. But if you go look at the Massdrop, although they've changed their name now to just Drop, they've got like a Glycine seems to be coming up every second week, if not 2 Glycines, and if not every week. There just seems to be this regular flow of Glycines coming through Drop. Given how long it takes to get a watch, I suspect they're trying to shift some older inventory. So what that means for the future, I don't know. One of the things that is happening on that Massdrop site is that I don't like is that classic Invicta selling thing of saying that, you know, you can get this watch for $530 when with a little cross through the MSRP at $3,500. I doubt anyone has ever paid $3,500 for this watch, like ever. So that's just a flat out lie. And if they did, if some poor sucker did actually pay that much for one of these watches, oh man, that's just a crime. Glycine should feel bad about taking that person's money. But that said, this watch for $530 on Massdrop is in fact cheaper than you would normally get it. I'll put up this particular watch, the Glycine M40 number 1, is also available through Noman Watches, a company I've used and would recommend, and normally have quite good prices. They're wanting, I think it was $650, $700 for this watch. I'll put it. You'll see it when I put the sheet up. So even though Massdrop is kind of with Glycine's information not really telling the truth about what the MSRP on this watch would be, $530 for this watch is cheaper than you would normally get it. Now, the reason why it links to the previous story is that Glycine, like Longine, like Breitling, are picking up on the smaller watch, the women's / gender neutral watch, and this is you can buy here a true GMT, so an independently settable GMT hand watch in a 40mm, but also a 36mm version. Now, I believe this is the only watch of this type, this style, this complication I've found with a quick search that comes in a 36. So if you're one of these people who have always kind of wanted a GMT watch but been worried about the size, go to Massdrop right now. There is someone selling you one on either that could be a 40 or even a 36. So if that's you, go check it out. Okay, so moving from the Invicta owned $500 Glycine to now Only Watch. Okay, so Only Watch is a biennial charity event, one-off timepieces where sort of high-ish to extraordinarily high-end manufacturers are invited to donate a piece. Ideally, that piece is a one-off to be auctioned in an auction that I think is held in Geneva in November. All the money going to research on a particular type of muscular dystrophy, which I can't remember. I think it's kids' muscular dystrophy. This has been going on. This is the 7th or 8th, so it's been going about 14 years. In that time, it's raised about 40 million Swiss francs. That can't be bad, surely. So whilst it's easy to be cynical about the watch industry in general and high-end watch industry companies in particular, I think high-end watch companies making one-off pieces with the money going to charity is something that I think we can probably get behind and not feel too bad about supporting. It is nice to go and have a look at their watches. Now, this show has been getting wall-to-wall coverage. Pretty much everyone's talking about it. So in fact, I'm not going to recommend anywhere in particular to go to look at it. I picked it up and had a look at the pictures from Monochrome. The way that site's designed, you don't have to do lots of opening and closing. You get a pretty quick look at things. I would also recommend you watch, now Ariel Adams did a podcast and YouTube video about the watches that were being offered at Only Watch. I would strongly recommend you go see that one, and I'd probably recommend not so much listening to it, but watching the YouTube video. It's not like there's no talking heads or anything like that, but you do, as you often see with when David Breeden and Ariel do these sort of video things. David will be scrolling through and you can see what they're seeing on the screen at the time, and so it just works a bit easier. What's really interesting here is we punters who don't see a lot of some of these independent brands a lot can kind of get wowed by some of the stuff they put out. Adrian really has an interesting take on this because Ariel has a really interesting take on this because he gets to see a lot of these companies like all the time. And what we might see is, wow, isn't that amazing? He can be quite dismissive of and say, oh, they've rolled out this yet another version of this watch that they've been doing for a decade. When are we going to see something new? And it's really quite interesting to see that dynamic about what someone in the professional watch media who really knows these companies and what they're capable of can give a far better assessment of a watch than you and I, who might see this company that we've never seen before. Even though they've been doing it for 10 years, it's novel to us, we get all wowed. So yeah, go to the Only Watch site, have a look at the watches, but I'd strongly recommend you also watch the Ariel Adams Blog to Watch video on YouTube. You'll get a really different perspective on some of these watches. In terms of the watches that are there, they vary in price and they vary in originality and effort, from hardly any effort and hardly any originality through to, oh my god, I can't believe they've done that, and all points in between. Okay, so I'm going to start. I'm not going to run through all the watches. There's like 40 of them, but I'm just going to hit some of my highlights and lowlights. And I'll start with my low light. My low light is the Tudor Black Bay Ceramic. It is a fantastic watch from probably about 5 or 10 years ago. Now it is just another murdered out watch. Clearly they got Tudor got the work experience kid who didn't really understand how to use CAD to design this, because it's dull, it's boring, it's unimaginative, and it's kind of like last decade's idea. My almost but not quite watch goes to the Atelier de Monaco Tourbillon Oculus only watch. Almost, because there are some parts of this I really don't like. I hate that the part of the dial which actually tells you the time, it just looks kind of old-fashioned and dodgy and boring. So it seems out of sync with the rest of the watch. But why do I love it? Gold infused carbon fiber. Is there a more baller material than that? That is just killer. It is now my mission in life to one day own a watch made from gold infused carbon fiber. I just love the case of that watch. It is a killer. I just wish they'd got something more modern to put on the front of it. 1, 2. In Australia, we have a term for a certain kind of person, the kind of person who has very working class taste but has a shit tin of money, and that we call that the cub, the cashed up bogan, or the boganaire. If I wanted to unleash my inner cashed up bogan, it would definitely be this watch, and that is the Artia Precious Butterfly engraved. I can just see this watch on my wrist with a full sleeve tattoo, probably some beaded bracelets wrapped around it, and certainly while I'm wearing something like an Ed Hardy t-shirt. I think I would just kill the western suburbs of most Melbourne towns if that's what I could wear. I wanted to donate a watch but couldn't be asked doing anything about making it original award goes to the Blancpain 50 Fathoms. Now, in this particular case, the Blancpain 50 Fathoms is a standard everyday 50 fathoms where they simply change the color of the indices and the markers from that kind of green that they do to the powder blue that was the sort of the color palette that they were asked to use as a theme this year. I don't know if Blancpain could have done less if they had. I don't know how they could have done less to provide a watch for this. So good on them for giving something, but really that's the best you could do. Sorry. Now, for me, I think there's a Patek Philippe in there that's probably going to make the most money in the show, but it's all in all not a particularly attractive watch. For me, the standout, the killer, the watch to really pay attention to here is this one, and that is the FP Jaune Astronomique Bleu. I'm not going to go through all the specs and things, but essentially this watch does most things you can imagine a watch could do. Phase of the day, moon phase, multiple time zones, equation of time, tourbillon, power reserve, using both the front and the back of the watch. In fact, frankly, I think the back of the watch is even better looking than the front, but that's to damn it with faint praise, because the front of the watch is equally stunning. It's just an absolute killer piece, and just when you think sort of FP Jaune has done all he can do, comes out with this, and it's just incredible. This is, for me, clearly the watch of the collection. But as much as I do love the FP Jaune, I'm not sure if that's actually the watch I would like to own. You know, I'm amazed by its complications and that sort of thing, but if you've seen my what I'm into kind of thing, I'm not really a complications guy generally, but there is a watch, and so by definition there's not going to be a lot of watches here at Only Watch I really like, but there is one that really caught my eye and I would love to be able to wear on my wrist if I could find the $250,000 it would probably cost. And that's this one, the Ferdinand Batude Chronometer FB1 Night Star. Really stunning case shape, lots of really interesting mixes of texture and line and curve. I like the way they break, they kind of inverse the normal convention of the watch. Normal convention is big hour, big minute, small seconds. Here they've gone for the big seconds with the small hour, small minute. It's a fun way of representing the time. All in all, just a really beautiful watch that you know is going to be really well made and just fantastic. That is the watch, if I could afford it, if I was in the sort of Only Watch buying segment, that's the one I'd have my eye on. Okay, so now in terms of watch media, what have I noticed this week? Well, first off, in podcast land, the guys over at 40 and 20 did a really nice piece on GMT watches. GMT watches tend to be more expensive, and the 40-20 guys tend to hover more at the affordable end, around a couple $100 US. So I don't think there's not normally a lot of crossover between the kinds of watches they look at and GMT watches. In this particular case, they've found watches that do sort of live in that nice little zone. They talk about the different kinds of GMT capability and different ways that you can provide it, and they do so without a lot of the snobbishness that some people inject into it, like calling some watches secretaries GMTs versus flies GMTs. So some really, it's a good podcast. I'm not going to try and describe it anymore. If you want to know more about GMTs and have a kind of laid back, fun think about them and have someone explain them to you in the history, go out and check the 40 and 20 podcast. The other big podcast, and probably the big podcast of the week, was on Hodinkee. So they've done, it's the middle of the year, there's not a lot going on, we're all kind of scratching for stories. So they've done the old standby of, we're halfway through the year, what's wowed us so far? And so in there, it is really interesting. They talk about, sort of what are the most interesting watches that they've seen, where do they think the industry is going. There's a lot of talk about the end of perhaps the heritage reissue. Funnily enough, probably not, given that we've had Longines and a few other companies just reissue old heritage lines. But they're saying that there's a discussion about, is that well drying up, and a watch company is going to be forced to do some design again soon. Some discussion about how that might not be very easy for them, because a lot of them have been downsizing. A lot of discussion about how at the moment the industry seems to be kind of just holding their breath, and maybe that's why this year's been kind of quiet. We are running out of the heritage stuff, but at the same time people aren't sure what the next direction is going to be. So maybe the brands are all kind of waiting to see which way we go. So a lot of discussion there. Then they rolled into a long talk about Rolex, its place in the market, and wait lists and what's going on. There was a lot of discussion about steel sports watches and some other sorts of things. What I wanted to sort of talk about and give my opinion on was where they went to next. Well, the first thing was that they said this is all conjecture, because the truth is no one plays their cards closer to their chest than Rolex. So we're all kind of like in Plato's cave, watching the shadows on the wall, trying to figure out what the hell the person outside is doing. And that's absolutely true. And I'm no better or worse than that than anyone else. So everything I'm about to say is pretty much my conjecture on how I think things are working. But I disagree with the guys on Hodinkee. So their position was that Rolex is in a uniquely but all-powerful position. They can pretty much do whatever they want and know it's going to be successful. And they're in the danger for them is that being so powerful, and also not wanting to compromise their long-term brand equity, they could find themselves in a position where they can't really get rid of their wait lists. And there was a discussion about how they're already they're already running a Saturday shift and evening shifts, which, if you know, like this Central European, like Germany and Switzerland, that's pretty amazing. They don't work weekends. So they're kind of working at capacity right now. They were sort of saying they could move in any direction, but they're so powerful. Probably the biggest risk to them, the biggest threat to them, doesn't come from other watch companies, but rather comes from people getting so frustrated they go off and spend their luxury money on something else. So the idea was that the biggest risk to Rolex isn't Omega, but rather it's Porsche, or it's a trip to Chernobyl, or it's buying a Hermes handbag or something. I don't really agree with that. Except for that last bit, I've got a little spin on that. And that is really what I think is Rolex is not all powerful. They can't do whatever they want. The time teller, Jory, did a really interesting video a little while ago where I had some problems with his argument, but I didn't disagree with his facts, if that makes sense. He was asked, which is a better brand, Rolex or Omega? And the opening question was, which is a better brand? Is Rolex actually better than Omega, or is Omega secretly better than Rolex? And am I just buying into the marketing hype? And he argued that Rolex is objectively a better brand. And he then gave 5 reasons for why, which were all related to marketing, which I found was really interesting. And his logic was, and this is the part I agree with him, because he was absolutely correct. Rolex is so powerful because they've got such strong brand discipline. They really know what they stand for. It's incredibly predictable. Anyone who wants to walk into a Rolex store knows what the product's going to be. And they don't have too many SKUs. They don't offer too many options. They know what they want to sell you, and they've carefully created the environment, the luxury environment, where you aspire to that brand and you want that brand. And that is why they are so powerful. And then compared it to Omega, where too many SKUs, too much variety, kind of all over the place, and have kind of frittered away their brand equity. I don't disagree with that. But I also think that the seeds of Rolex's destruction is completely the wrong word. I really see that the kind of the danger to Rolex's dominance is in that last part, and that is they're so disciplined and they're so conscious of their brand equity, and they're so determined to create more of that equity and make themselves a luxury good, that if people decide that they really want Rolexes because they are such a great status piece, because they are such a great positional good, such a fantastic and quintessentially luxury item, that's great. But what if they want all of that, but want something different to an oyster case? Then Rolex is screwed, because they've got nothing. If you want something that isn't in that plain oyster case from Rolex, they have nothing to offer you. Yes, they have some Cellini lines, and yes, in the past they've done some square shapes and everything, but those are so far back in history that, and if you watch a lot of Rolex channels, those watches are openly derided. If Rolex was to try and dip into that well, I think Rolex would actually, kind of like Panerai with their Douai, would suffer some real kickback from the Toolboy watch fans. The other way around. The Tool watch fanboys, that I'm not sure if the Rolex brand could maintain its equity. Now, here's the thing. Who is there in the watch community that could really take advantage of the idea of a high status positional good for a watch that wasn't necessarily a tool watch, but also carried all of that extra status, all of that power that comes with a Rolex? Some of the obvious ones would be Patek and everything, but they're above Rolex already, so that's not really the argument here. We're talking about those brands around about 5 to 10,000, maybe up to about 20,000 US. And these are the 5 brands I think in the medium term pose the greatest threat to Rolex's dominance. And they are Cartier, Chopard, Bulgari, Hermes, and Louis Vuitton, and Chanel. All of those are fashion companies. All of those are fashion companies with huge brand equity, not in the watch market, but in the wider luxury goods market. Were the tide to turn even a little bit against the idea of a tool-based oyster-cased style watch, where Rolex would struggle to move to, all of those companies are ready to pounce. Would any one of them drag down Rolex? No. Rolex currently, last time I saw, I think they constitute around about 20% of Swiss watch sales. So Rolex is not going to collapse. The question is, would they potentially reduce from 20% to say 15% to 14%? Absolutely, that's on the cards. Could they be overtaken by Omega at that point, who do have options other than the straight tool watch? Quite possibly. There's a joke. I once heard Billy Connolly talk about a cameraman and a film guy out on the Serengeti in Africa watching a lion, and then they notice that they've crept a bit too far away from the camp and a bit too close to the lion, and the camera guy sort of turns and looks down at and he sees the sound guy sort of slip off his boots and slip into some runners, and the camera guy turns and says, "What do you think? What are you doing that for? You're not going to outrun the lion." And the sound guy just says, "I don't have to outrun the lion, mate." That's where I see the position in the future between Rolex and Omega. In the medium term, that's where I see the relationship between a company like Omega and a company like Rolex. Things will change. The desire to move away, there will be a change in the market at some point where we get tired of the same iteration over and over again of the oyster style watch case. When that happens and the line starts chasing Omega and Rolex, those companies don't have to outrun the thing that's chasing them. They have to outrun each other. And in that particular race, I think Omega has way more choices than Rolex. So whilst Rolex is dominant now, whilst that discipline that they has in this environment where people are chasing solid and dependable and conservative, in this environment where we're getting constant repetitions of old heritage designs, the Rolex design that never changes is a good thing. If we start thinking that that's going to change, if we start thinking that one day, sooner or later, we're going to move away from that very simple classic aesthetic, then Rolex will struggle to make that transition. And all of that diversity and all of that difficulty and all of that kind of spearing off in different directions, which at the moment is the reason why Omega can't compete, could be the reason why Omega in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years passes Rolex again. So that's my take on it. I don't think that Rolex is actually sitting on its mountain able to do whatever it wants. I think Rolex has built itself a fantastic bunker, and I don't know if Rolex actually can move out of it. Time will tell, but that's my take on that particular part of the industry. Okay, so we're going to go out on a slightly lighter note now, staying in YouTube land. First off, I mentioned 2 weeks ago, or I mentioned in last week's news, that Adrian got himself invited to this Rolex dealer thing, and gave an excellent insight into the relationship between Rolex and their user community, their customers. The guys at Clockbait just ripped that apart and did a really funny skit on what the world would look like if Rolex was a sandwich shop. So go see it. It's really funny. You'll have a cack. Interesting. I don't know if it was a response to that or whether it just happened to be in the water, and Adrian went and did another video talking about how people get very antsy about the Rolex situation and feel very bratty and entitled about it. Good video where he talks about how we get a bit carried away at blaming Rolex, and we should really just have a long hard look at ourselves and get over it. I don't disagree with him entirely, but I do disagree with him a bit in that, like a lot of people, like a lot of YouTubers, there's a lot of this sort of, you should just get over it. You should just realize that you're being manipulated and move on. And I'm less sanguine about people's ability to turn on a dime and do that. There's a curiously Hidden Brain, which is a podcast run through NPR that I enjoy. This week they did a special too on I Buy Therefore I Am, and it's about the psychology of people's relationships to branding. It's a little bit pop psychology, and I don't love it, and the guy presenting it goes a little bit off the deep end, but it does give some really interesting examples, and it really starts to touch a bit on why we should recognize that part of being human is that we attach ourselves to these ideas, we attach ourselves to these things. Brands know that, and if they use, and this is where I disagree with Adrian, where he kind of said we should just move on. One, brands know that we can't. They invest vast amounts of money in manipulating emotions that we have only loose control over to deliberately try and entice us and activate the little emotional parts of our brain that we struggle to control. So I wouldn't let them off the hook for that. If they're deliberately using their research and their power to try and influence you, that's a little bit evil. And so I'm less sanguine than Adrian was about that, and I get a little bit more annoyed with them. That said, I'm going to stick with the theme of Adrian now and go to another video that I raised last week, which was Gunzap. Go see Adrian and Gunzap did a hilarious video on kind of Adrian's take on something that was launched at a weapon that was launched at him from Archie, and it's all very funny. What it really does, I get accused, and I think we all probably should plead a little bit guilty of taking this whole world a bit seriously, getting a bit carried away with our own sense of self-importance. Gunzap here does a really good job of pointing out this is all a bit of panto, and I think particularly from now on, when I'm watching, for example, Archie, I'm increasingly going to be thinking of him largely as a pantomime witch. And I think it's really, we should spend more time just when we see these kind of internet watch or identity feuds. And this is something I'm going to take on myself. we should turn down the drama a little bit and just enjoy the show, right up until they try and sell us shit, and then that's when it gets a bit serious. But all in all, I think we should probably enjoy the panto, and there should be a lot more screaming of "watch out, he's behind you" when we see Luxury Archie and those guys on video. Anyway, so that's it. I'm run out of ideas. I've got to the end of the screen behind me. If you wonder why I keep looking away, I've got a screen just on the other side which has got just my notes. Hope you enjoyed this. Probably a bit longer than usual. I'll wait to see in the edit. Please subscribe. I am slowly but surely moving towards my first target of 1,000 subscribers. As I said, after I hit 1,000, YouTube starts to switch on a few more things. So that's kind of a big deal for me. I'm sitting on about 620, so I need about 380 of you more to sign up. Google Analytics tells me 2/3 of the people that watch these videos are not subscribers. So I feel like I actually am talking to some of you, or some of the people I need to talk to are probably going to be watching this. So as I said, please subscribe. I promise to keep doing this. I promise to keep trying to get better. Thanks very much. Bye.